you. Does enCore have the social license to move forward with uranium mining around the Navajo Nation territory? And what's your relationship like with this community?
I'll let Bill take that one.
Yeah, I would say it's certainly not in place now. It's not a light switch. You don't flip it, and by extension, I'll give you some examples. In the Yukon, on a gold company that we were involved with, and some of our team members, it was a multi-year, you know, extremely long process. You aren't coming in and, as I think Paul mentioned, building a gazebo and handing out jobs. You're really cultivating a long-term relationship, especially in the case of New Mexico, where if done properly, we're looking at a 40 or 50-year time period of a relationship, and potentially much longer than that. So you've got to be careful the way you do it, and you don't buy trust; you earn it, and there's a big difference. One of the key programs that we would be looking at would be very much like the Tyson Majetic joint venture in Saskatchewan that Paul had mentioned as well with Cameco. And just to give you a little snapshot of the type of thing that can be done, we're in the early days with it, and obviously with COVID, we haven't been able to do much in person, although we certainly were active and at the front of providing relief supplies to the Navajo who were particularly hard hit by COVID. But the Tyson Majetic really is a blueprint, and no two will be exactly the same, but it's a very, very good example where Tyson Engineering started a joint venture with the Majetic group of First Nations, a number of them, in Saskatchewan with $1 million of seed money. And that was probably 15, 20 years ago now, certainly 15. And that's turned into a $100 million, enterprise, and it covers all facets, not just labor, but all facets of mine servicing and supply. And it's not just restricted to Cameco; it's now in the potash mines, and it's also spreading outside of Saskatchewan. And it's driven by the Aboriginal or First Nation people, and they manage it, they run it, and it's a classic case of how you can do this right. And you actually build careers, not jobs, and you build a lasting, enduring economic engine for them. And it's not a handout; it's a helping hand, if you will. And but it takes time, and so we aren't there yet, but we're dedicated to it. And here again, that's reflective of why we say it's on our 5-year out time horizon.
Okay, all part of the sustainability of the project, I would imagine. So.
Well, it is, and quite frankly, it goes beyond just an Aboriginal issue, and you're looking at it anywhere that you're doing business. If you're doing business anywhere with any community, you're the guest. You're going in, whether it's in Wyoming, you're a guest of the ranchers that have been there for generations. And if you don't treat them properly and develop the right relationship, you're going to have a bumpy road. And so you've got to, I call it the good neighbor policy. You've got to implement that wherever you are. It's just recent that the social license has become quite a buzzword in the mining industry and the ESG and all of that. But realistically, it's something that you've got to practice, or you aren't going to get there, and you've got to believe in it, or you aren't going to be very good at it. So I think on both those marks, we'll check the boxes, and it's here again far greater than just checking a box. It's actually doing it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, earning that trust is actually part of my next question. In South Texas, a lot of ground is tied up as being private as opposed to public or owned by the country. How easy is it to arrange surface rights in Texas, and does this really help or hurt your cause when it comes to permitting projects?
Well, it's a leasing and is basically, first of all, that most of the land is broken up into smaller tracts on private property, but there are some larger tracts, large ranches that have significant uranium resources. And it's a matter of just coming to terms. And we've been successful to this point. At least I feel we have on acquiring some of these leases, et cetera. And also the landowners are much more realistic these days. Most of them were looking at the oil and gas industry as setting their benchmarks for pricing and et cetera. And with the retraction in the oil industry, particularly on the Eagle Ford Shale down in South Texas, it has brought more realism back into the eyes of the landowners. It never is something that happens overnight. You do have to negotiate. You have to have a conversation with these folks. And we have an experienced set of land experts that have talked to, who know these landowners from past negotiations, et cetera. So there's a high level of trust with them. And so I would say that it is a trust building exercise. You've got to earn their trust. There's some landowners that have been burned by prior operators, and they don't. You got to make sure that they understand that you're going to live up to what you say you're going to do. And that's how we operate. That's my philosophy, is to minimize our impact on their lands, keep our footprint, even though we may lease a few hundred acres. Keep our impact as minimal as possible, so we don't disturb what the landowner has going on the other parts of their land, and it keeps them happy.